Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Life with Loverly podcast. We have a really special episode for you today. I had the honor of sitting down with another Athens native, Katherine Wolf. Katherine's story is one that will pull on your heartstrings and embodies the true essence of a triumphant spirit. In 2007, Katherine was 25 years old, working as an actress and model in Los Angeles, living with her husband, Jay, who was a lawyer, and they had just had their first child. Then, out of the blue in 2008, Katherine suffered a massive brainstem stroke. Miraculously, and despite the doctor's assessments, Katherine survived. After 40 days in the ICU, Katherine began her journey to relearn how to walk, talk, swallow, and learn how to live with her permanent disabilities that include facial paralysis and the inability to walk on her own, all while trying to care for an infant. But let me tell you, despite all of Katherine's obstacles, this conversation is one of joy, hope, and transformation. In this inspirational conversation, I'm chatting with Katherine about her journey of healing and all of the lessons her disabilities have taught her along the way. Katherine is on a mission to disrupt the myth that joy can only be found in a pain-free life, and I couldn't be more grateful for this conversation. She's here to remind us all that we get to decide how we feel about our story. Katherine said in this conversation, "I'm decidedly living an incredibly blessed life, largely because I have eyes to see it that way." And this is my hope for each one of you after this episode, that we may have the eyes to see the joy in our lives today. This is truly a life-changing conversation, and I can't wait to share this with you. Here's my chat with Katherine Wolf. Hi, friends. Welcome back to today's episode of the Life with Loverly podcast. I am so excited to have Katherine Wolf here. This is such an honor, Katherine, to talk with you. I feel like I know your story from following along when things were just happening. So I'm really excited to talk with you about just your story and kind of hear where you are today and just talk about all the wonderful things that you've done over the last several years. But welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Brittany. I'm so glad to be here. And I love that you're from my hometown.
I know. We were just catching up before we started the recording, and Katherine and I are both from Athens. It's funny because we actually grew up like not that far down the road from each other.
Totally.
And you went to Sanford after Athens, or after you graduated. Is that where you met your husband?
Yeah, Jay and I met at Sanford.
Okay.
Yeah, and married and moved to California for 15 years and then back to Atlanta where we live now.
Oh my goodness.
What
Yeah.
about you? Did you wave, I'm thinking?
So I ended up leaving Athens and going to school at Valdosta State University,
Cool.
South Georgia,
Yeah.
and moved back to it. I moved to Atlanta after college, lived there for about 8 years, and then moved back to Athens in 2020. So I've been back here for about 4 years now.
Oh, got it. Okay. Are you single, married? I don't even know.
Yes, I am married. I have 2 daughters who are 5 and almost 4.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. So they're keeping me busy.
Yeah.
So you guys moved out to LA, and that was for Jay to attend law school, and you were modeling and acting.
Well, all of that's really sounds much greater than it was. I was doing something called commercial print modeling, which is like I was in commercials and I was in catalogs, and basically it really didn't have hardly anything to do with my appearance and everything to do with the fact that I have one great skill, and that's communication. So I would make friends with all the casting directors and they would book me. And so I worked a ton. I had great clients and did a lot of good commercial work pre-stroke.
Yeah. So then in 2008, when you were 26 years old, that's kind of where your life completely changed. I would love to talk a little bit about just that time in your life. If you could share your story with our listeners who haven't heard it. I know you had a son at the time too. How old was he when all of this happened?
6 months old. Yeah, 6 months.
Oh my goodness.
It was crazy. So yeah, as a 26-year-old with no medical history, no family history, no symptoms, no no indication anything was the matter. I woke up one morning and ended the day having had a massive brainstem stroke and very nearly died, and was kept alive through 16 hours of micro brain surgery as my 6-month-old baby was being cared for by others, and friends and family took over the waiting room at the hospital to see if I would live. And I did live, even though in order to remove the AVM, my doctors had to severely wound me. I like to say that I was wounded deeply so that I could be healed.
Mm-hmm.
It kept me alive by operating and cutting nerves and making choices, sacrifices to keep me alive. To this day, I remain largely disabled. I can't drive a car. I'm deaf in one ear, blind in one eye. My face is paralyzed on one side, which your listeners cannot see, but you can see. I have no movement on one side of my face, and just a plethora of health challenges and many ongoing surgeries. And my body's pretty messed up after the stroke, and yet I'm doing really well, and have had
Yeah.
just an amazing 16 years since the brain rupture.
I actually remember when this happened, just being somebody who is from Athens and just knowing you from our, like, knowing of you and your family in our community, and just being so like touch and go. Like, is she okay? Is she going to live? You
Right.
know, and I mean, how long were you fully in the hospital for? It was like years,
Oh,
right?
oh yeah. So the initial first hospital was 6 months. The next hospital was a year and a half. And in that time, I had to relearn everything, to
Hmm.
eat, to speak, to swallow, to stand, to walk. So I was taken down virtually to like being a baby again, and had to
Yeah.
relearn to do everything. And the largest ongoing issue is that I couldn't swallow food. That's probably what you may remember. I
Hmm.
feel like everybody in the world was praying for me to eat again.
Yeah.
I spent over 11 months not even allowed to have ice or water, but with nothing, because my body had not relearned to swallow food. It was terrible.
Yeah, I remember specifically praying for just your life, like that you would live and you would wake up, because there was even a period right after it happened. Like, how long were you um like unconscious for? Because that was a long period too.
Totally. It depends on who you ask, because I appeared awake and tracking to my family and friends after the first several days, but I have absolutely no memory for 2.5 months. So I
Wow.
completely, I mean, to me, I was in a coma for the first 2.5 months. I woke up and
Hmm.
had no idea a day had passed, but it had been from April 21st to early July that I have no memory of. So we think I was in a coma-like state where I
Hmm.
appeared awake. I could open my eyes, but nothing was staying cognitively.
Wow. So then when you had that moment of like remembrance, or like did you recognize your husband and your baby at that point, and it kind of
Yeah,
all came back to you?
totally. Yeah. So no, while my body was obviously super impaired, the cognition was completely intact. So it was horrific because nothing had changed in my cognitive, in my faith, in my memories, in my personality. Everything was totally intact. So I just couldn't communicate at all. So
Mhm.
eventually, actually, the speech pathologist team gave me like a communication device called a letterboard, and I would type with my one working hand on the board, and the robot would say the letter, and my family would spell the words, so I could communicate that way. So I would type, I'm the same on the inside, because I so desperately wanted my family and friends to know that everything was exactly the same. I was fully tracking with memories and personality. It's so interesting though, Brittany, because I would never say that today. Like I would never say I'm the same on the inside because I'm decidedly not the same on the inside 16 years later. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Deep suffering in these last 16 years has done incredible things for my character and for who I've become as a person, as a wife, as a mother. So I would never utter those words, but I completely understand why I did, of course.
Right.
But it's so interesting because even that bigger concept of who we are, is it connected to how our bodies work?
Right.
And the answer is, of course not. And yet it's extremely complex when you can't communicate. And I'm grateful that from the very start, my cognition was there. And once I did have memory again, I just treasured having so many sweet friends and family and just people, wonderful Athens, Georgia folks who were there. Actually, Brittany, really sweet. You may have lived in Athens then.
I did.
In 2008, you did?
Well, I was actually in school. I was but down in Valdosta, but I remember being like back and forth.
I bet you were back and forth. So the first Christmas after the stroke, so Christmas 2008, the Athens Banner Herald ran a story that Katherine Wolf was coming to her hometown for the first time from the hospital in California. And so sweet Athens residents, I think the mayor at the time, Doc Eldridge, may have, declared to do this, but had residents put yellow ribbons on their mailboxes.
Yes.
And so my parents drove me all over town seeing yellow ribbons all over. It was so sweet. Do you remember that?
I do. It's crazy. I mean, and I think just because I was friends with Grace and was just like, oh my goodness, this is so like
my baby sister,
crazy for their family and just like, but definitely some of those very vivid. I followed your story just since I feel like I kind of knew you just through Grace, and it's just so wild. So at this point in your life, what would you say, like, how is your relationship with Christ? Were you a very active Christian? Did you was that immediately playing into your recovery? How are you feeling on those fronts?
I love that you asked that. I didn't know if we're talking about faith on this podcast or not, but
yes.
Awesome. I have loved Jesus since I was a little girl and walked with him. I mean, completely imperfectly, but walked with him for my whole life, before and after the stroke, and was able to cope, I believe, with the tragedy because I had hope in Jesus and knew that somehow, some way, this was all part of the story he was writing through my life. And of course, I never would have opted into the story. I never would have chosen this.
Right.
And yet I see God's hand so clearly throughout it that even from the earliest of days, I just had to trust that God was at work and that for some reason he chose me for the story. So I'm definitely deeply impacted by my faith all throughout.
Yeah.
And I will say, Brittany, that the first 26 years of my life, which you knew me a bit from afar as Grace's older sister, but the first 26 years were largely pain-free in a way that I mistakenly considered the blessed life. I went to the same wonderful private school in Athens for 14 years straight. I went to the college I wanted to go to. I married my college sweetheart, moved to California, had a wonderful baby. Life was good. and easy. And I was doing commercial modeling. And we were super involved with our Sunday school class and had wonderful friends and, all the trappings of the good life. And I would have mistakenly identified that as the blessed life.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, so clearly throughout the Bible, the blessed life has nothing to do with earthly blessings.
Right.
And I never reconciled that the blessed life is the life where the Beatitudes would say, you're poor in spirit, the meek, those who mourn, very clearly not my pre-stroke life. And the question, of course, is, well, was that the blessed life or is this the blessed life?
Mm-hmm.
And do we misunderstand and misuse blessings and the hashtag blessing that's thrown on things that are entirely not
Right.
blessings? And it's an interesting discussion. I would say my life before my stroke was largely charmed for sure. I don't pretend it wasn't, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I mean,
Yeah.
if you are born into an intact family system with loving, engaged parents, and you have food on your table at night, and you are living a story that is not one of medical fragility or 10,000 really hard things, I believe you need to utilize that to make this world a better place and bring
Yeah.
glory to God, for sure. And that's what I'm here trying to do. And I think anyone in the position of any kind of advantage in this world, which are hard to understand, it's political landmines to get into all that. I wouldn't dare. Don't worry. I think we are all called to use whatever is in our story. And
Yeah.
sometimes that can be the hard things, and sometimes that can be the really good and easy things. But I can say with assurance, I am decidedly living an incredibly blessed life, largely because I have eyes to see it that way. And
Yeah.
many people, many of your listeners, no doubt, miss the miracle life that they are living. That being here, being in this moment is a miracle. We are all living out second chance miracles, whether or not we've nearly.
Yeah.
The fact that we are on earth in this moment and did not get hit by a bus yesterday is a profound miracle. And we need to live like that.
Totally. And I just think it's so amazing. It just kind of makes me think of how great God really is, knowing that he knew that this was going to happen to you when you were 26, and he has your whole life laid out. But to see how he's used you to touch so many lives based off of what he is doing, I think that is like such an amazing miracle. And he set you up like perfectly for that. And everything that's happened in the last 16 years, I just think that in itself is such a miracle and such a gift.
Being able to champion the disability community is the joy of my life. And
Yeah.
while I always had a deep bend toward the things of justice and Jesus and hope and just the underdog, I've always been wired that way. Everything is just times 1,000 now that now I get to champion in a real way people who are legitimately marginalized and forgotten in our world. And people with disabilities are actually the largest minority group in the entire world. No one
Wow.
would know that. People
Yeah.
with disabilities are on the top of every list you would never want to be on, from homelessness to divorce to suicide. So the population with disabilities is super under-resourced across the board. So my husband and I founded a camp for families with disabilities where someone in the family has a disability and the entire family comes for free. And
Wow.
it's just amazing week-long retreat-like experience. It's glorious. You should come.
Yes.
Most recently, we've opened a coffee shop and retail concept in Atlanta in Buckhead called Mend Coffee and Goods. Your listeners should come check it out.
Yes.
And already, I mean, the people coming through the doors who are just so needing of hope is just unbelievable. I had a sweet woman who got the flu last fall and it went septic and she had to have her legs amputated several weeks ago. A friend of a friend had her come to Mend to meet me and have coffee and let me encourage her. And I left that meeting, and this was just like 6 days ago. And I remember thinking, like, I cannot believe I get to do this with my life. Like, oh my gosh, what I just was able to instill in that woman is hope. And
Yeah.
I'm here for it. Able bodied, doing great Catherine didn't really have a platform from which to share about the hope of Jesus.
Right.
And now I do. And it is so cool. So I am for sure a very blessed woman.
I love that. So you wrote a book in your book, Before I Can Heal, I Have to Grieve What's Been Lost.
Yeah.
What did both healing and grieving look like at that time for you?
Oh, wonderful question. So yeah, I deeply believe before you can heal from anything you're going through, you must go through the incredibly healthy process of grieving the losses. And lamenting, I believe, is a huge part of understanding any trauma, any loss in our world. I promise you won't stay there in the grief and the lament, but you must start there and feel those things. Anybody who pops up the morning after their tragedy and writes a book about it and starts public speaking, I'm like, nope, not here for it, because they haven't processed it. It would be 5 years before I even started publicly speaking about this. It would be 7.5 years before we would have a book come out and start talking about it. It would be, gosh, 2017 to 11 years that we founded a camp. Anyway, on and on. Years and years are passing. And I think there's such wisdom in that if you immediately bounce back, you're not learning the right lessons. Really sweet. After the stroke, after about the first 6 months, I had to move to a rehab facility, and it was just really, really hard, really dark. And I'm big into this notion of rebelling against the darkness with hope. And for some reason, I decided that I would stay up. Now, I only have one working hand. This hand doesn't have fine motor. So I only have one hand. But I decided I would type out a book, quote unquote, called My Journey Back, where I would document daily my journey back from nearly dying to new life. And I don't know where that came from exactly. I mean, it is like the sweetest little thing you've ever seen. Today I am trialing an ice chip to see if I can relearn to swallow. And today 3 people helped me stand up for 1 minute. I mean, it's just so sweet and sad, but so cathartic. And I wasn't trying to publish this document, but I wrote a book called My Journey Back. And I think that's a powerful thing we get to do is, we can grieve and process the loss, and maybe it's not made public yet. And that's a discretionary thing that people really need to learn. Like, there is a time to share and a time not to,
Right.
And
Yeah.
in the moment of grief is not the time.
Well, and I think it's okay to spend as much time as you need in that grieving process, where it feels like in today's society, it's like, okay, hurry up and get better.
Right.
And that's not fair for anybody who's actually grieving. So, for our listeners who might be in a time of grief, it is okay to stay there and live there and fully grieve your trauma.
Absolutely. And that's the only way to heal. Only way forward is to feel the grief, because the loss is real, and to try to white knuckle it through life's tragedies doesn't lead to healing.
Right.
They say that you never move on in life, that you can move forward in life in your story, but you carry with you where you've been.
Right.
If it's unprocessed, hurt people hurt people.
Mm-hmm.
Not going to go well.
Right, totally. Okay, so from your writing, it's very clear that you value the gift of humor. When you wrote about one of your last moments of lucidity after your stroke, you told your husband to call your friend Anna to take care of your son.
Yeah.
And then you wrote, even in what would have been my dying breaths, you were managing logistics. Classic Katherine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I just love your sense of humor through all the difficulties that you've been through. How would you say that your humor has been valuable in your healing journey?
I love that you're saying that. You people always comment on my humor, and no one ever did before my stroke. So my husband likes to say I got funnier after the stroke. Maybe some filter was taken out. I don't know. But the reality is, I think to cope in this world with all the hard and the sad, we need some humor. We need
Yeah.
levity. And the reality is, many times you better laugh or you're going to cry. And that's the real thing. Like, might as well laugh at the ridiculousness of life. Life is hard and there's tragedies. So you might as well learn to laugh. And I don't remotely mean be like oblivious and pie in the sky. I'm meaning there is joy and humor to be found in the everyday, and we should find it.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard something miraculous that you said in a previous podcast interview. You
Yeah.
said that it took you years to fully come to terms that your body wouldn't fully heal, which you've mentioned in this podcast as well. And now you say that the Lord has changed your perspective, that you don't even want that any longer. Can you talk to me a little bit about this and kind of what what your limitations have taught you?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So, I mean, early on after the stroke, probably when all of Athens, Georgia is tracking with me, is she going to eat food again? Is she going to walk again?
Mhm.
Is she going to do the basic things? And slowly and surely, those things are all happening. So the assumption was, oh, eventually everything will come back. One day she'll be running again and driving a car, and her face will miraculously be unparalyzed, and she'll be hearing out of her ear again, and on and on. And as none of those things happened and the years started passing, um, I think there were multiple moments of just waking up to, oh, this is not what I thought was going to happen in this story. And then there was a turn to, wait, I don't even need those things to happen in this story. Like, I get to decide how I feel about this story. No one else does. And what if I love it here? What if this is a wonderful life? And
Yeah.
no one can say it isn't. You know, it's so crazy, Brittany. Everybody and their brother wants to tell you how to feel about your story, good or bad. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody wants to speak into your life. But at the end of the day, you get to decide how you feel about your story. It's incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
I personally feel like with a Christ lens on my life, I get to look and assess it how I want to. I may not have been able to control everything that's happened to me in this life. No one is. Control is an illusion. However, I have complete control over what now, over how I think about it, how I marinate on it, how I process it, how I narrate it to my children. I have total control over that.
Yeah. And that's such a gift, and teaching them those things too, because hard things are going to happen in life. That's just the facts. But having those tools and setting yourself up for success when those things happen, that's powerful.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so let's fast forward to 2013 and you receive more news from your neurologist that now the good side of your brain has an unrelated aneurysm. What is going through your mind at this point?
Yeah, it was pretty devastating when I had to have an MRI, which is they do an annual MRI on my brain. And when my neurosurgeon had to relay those results, he was crying and he just said, I cannot believe this, but you have an unrelated aneurysm on the good side of your brain. So the unaffected um, left side had an aneurysm and I had to have it coiled. I had to have it removed. And, there was so many lessons in that for me. One was the lesson that there is no quota on suffering, that you can
Mhm.
go through the ringer and go through the ringer and then go through the ringer again and again and again. And honestly, it's a cycle in life. But what I've learned is that we can show up to the cycle of ongoing hurt with
Yeah.
ongoing hope. And we're at a different place because of the hope we've received. So we may go back into the fire, but we're equipped differently with where we've been. So, yeah, you may be in it again in a real nightmare of a situation, but you have been built by the past, the hope that you've seen, and you get to remember that that hope will show up again. So,
Yeah.
I think it taught me a lot about yeah, how resilience and how to move forward and process the ongoing cycle of hurt, hope, healing, and how that is not a fixed point. That
Yeah.
hope actually is not a fixed point. Hope is a process. Hope is what propels me into the future of the cycle of hurting and hoping.
Yeah. Um, so then a very spectacular miracle happens in 2015.
Yeah.
I just still remember reading this news that you were pregnant with your second son. How were you just so like, was this just unbelievable news to you?
Absolutely. It was crazy. I mean, the doctors did not ever think I would have a second biological child. And after that aneurysm was removed in 2013, then I was cleared to biologically become pregnant. And I did in 2014. And John Nestor was born in June of 2015. And it's really special. His name, John, is for my favorite book of the Bible, favorite chapter, John 9, talking about the blind man. I love the truth of John 9:3, that this happens so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And I
Yeah.
think the works of God are displayed through John's life. And John's middle name is Nestor, which is my neurosurgeon's first name.
Ah,
And so we named our son after um, Dr. Gonzalez, Dr. Nestor Gonzalez, who has no children, is unmarried. So it's really special that now he has a namesake. He actually came and held baby John Nestor the day he was born in the hospital.
so sweet.
Very, very special bond. We are still heavily in touch today. He sends my kids Christmas gifts. We are just dear, dear friends and so blessed by Dr. Nestor Gonzalez. He's been
Yeah.
a joy.
What did you feel like were some challenges that came into being pregnant, having, your body not working the same way it did when you were pregnant with your oldest son? I mean, because that was like a whole separate set of challenges being pregnant this time around. How were you mentally during that time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I was subconsciously much more careful about everything that I did because I didn't want to take a fall and I fall a lot and I don't have any balance. So I was very much more aware of like, stay upright, don't take a fall and stuff like that. But I mean, truly, Brittany, like it wasn't some big list of like I had to do things so differently. I was
Yeah.
considered high risk for
Mhm.
sure, and they, carefully monitored the pregnancy.
Yep.
And listen to this. I was supposed to have a C-section. So I geared up that like that's what I had to do because of all my brain issues. I just got to have the C-section. But then and so it was scheduled. But then I went into labor 2 weeks before the scheduled C-section and barely made it to the hospital. And when I got there, the baby was already coming out. So
Oh my
I delivered, I had to vaginally deliver in the triage room. I didn't even
Oh,
make it into a delivery room. So I had a completely natural birth with no issues and no
wow.
medication. And yeah, supposed to have surgery, supposed to have a C-section. And instead, he just completely naturally popped out. So
Oh my goodness.
it was yet another true miracle is that
Honestly.
it was so incredibly easy. I mean, it was
Yeah.
wild.
That is so amazing. Wow. I don't think I realized that you had him just naturally and that it was
So
so fast.
totally. It was wild.
Oh my goodness. Okay, and how old is he now?
He's now 8 years old, second
8.
grade, doing great. So I have
S
James, who's 16, 10th grade, and
Okay.
John, who's 8, second grade, and both
So
are,
sweet.
kids. They're not perfect, my goodness, but they are wonderful, and I'm very, very blessed to have them in this story.
I love that. Okay, we're gonna jump up to June 2017. You mentioned this earlier in the podcast, but I want to dive a little bit more into the Hope Hills camp in Alabama. Can you just tell me about the realization you had in 2014 when speaking at a camp and how it kind of sparked the whole thing? And just tell us all about the camp.
Totally. So I was the speaker at a camp for families where someone has a disability. And I don't think until that point in 2014, I had processed, oh, wait, like these are my people. For some reason, I wanted to disassociate that, oh gosh, no, like I will minister to the disability population, but I am not in this population, which of course is so ridiculous because I entirely am. But I just couldn't see it that way yet. It would take years. To process, I mean, many issues with your identity. And I finally was able to get there and then jumped in with both feet. And Jug and I just saw such a need for deep respite and rest for families who have disability in the story, resourcing and ending in every way. We knew we wanted a free experience. We knew we wanted a place to just share resources of all kinds, just really like that communal, we're in this together in this life, we can do this, just a place for fun and celebration and just joy. I believe so much of what our camp community does is disrupt the lie that joy can only come in a pain-free life, because
Yeah.
that isn't remotely true. And yet everyone wants to categorize like, okay, this is good, so there can be joy there, or this is bad and hard, so there can't be any joy. And our camper families know too well that's ridiculous, that there will always be hard things in our stories, and
Right.
yet there can be tremendous joy in the very same story. They coexist. Joy, hard, they go together. And the world doesn't like to think of it that way. Actually, I have a podcast called the Good Hard Story Podcast, where I love disrupting that myth
Yeah.
myself that joy can only come when it's pain free, because that's not true.
Okay. Well, and then I know you were mentioning the coffee shop that has just
Yes,
opened up,
I know.
Mend Coffee and Goods. Tell us all about that. Where is it?
Oh,
Like
it's
everything.
such a blessing. It's in the Tuxedo Festival Shopping Center in the heart of Buckhead off Roswell Road next to
Okay.
Cava. If you've ever been to Cava, it's phenomenal. We had no idea. We've been open a month today, actually,
Oh my
and we
goodness.
had no idea. The response has been insane. We've had Last Saturday, I was there, and people had driven from, I'm not kidding, Illinois to come. We had just I won't. It feels like bragging if I tell you, but people are supporting and coming to
Love
this
that.
coffee shop from a whole lot of places with just
Yeah.
a whole lot of need for hope and to get some really good coffee and have some conversation and just be in this space that uplifts people who are not always uplifted in this world.
I love that. I
Well,
am a huge coffee person, so next time I'm in Atlanta, I will definitely come by because coffee shops and coffee and just the ambiance of that whole, it's just such a treat. So that I'm
It
so
tot
excited.
it totally is, and coffee shops are a third place, they aren't home, they aren't work, they're somewhere you go, and there should be something set apart about that space, that it's an experience of community, of just being somewhere that's not a threatening place like a church can be to some, or a place where you're required to do something you don't want to do or uncomfortable doing. Coffee shop is kind of a place to come chill, drink some coffee,
Yeah.
have a conversation, and it's just been received by Buckhead and all of Atlanta in such a beautiful way, and we are just so grateful. It's surpassed
Yeah.
all expectations.
I love that. You've done such a miraculous job of keeping this hope-filled mindset after all that you've experienced. It's now 2024. How would you describe your life today?
Oh my goodness. It's hard because I don't want to be too filled with hope and joy that it's unrelatable because that's annoying. I know to some. So, um, an honest answer, life is pretty amazing. I um I can't believe I get to live this life.
Yeah.
I have these incredible sons, an amazing husband, just the dream career of all times. If you would have told me I could be a speaker and a writer and have this camp. I'm a real camp girl. I was the chief of my tribe back in the day, Camp DeSoto.
Yeah. Oh, I know Camp DeSoto.
Oh yeah, I was the chief of the Chickasaws. It was a big deal, and we won the cup that year. So it was like one
Yes.
of the biggest things in my life. And if you told me we would now open this coffee shop, whoa, who knew? And yet, just the fullness and richness of my life, my second chance life is just a dream. And I just sit back and go, "Are you serious? Did this all
Yeah.
happen? Like, what a gift!"
Yeah. No, that is I think to me that is like the best way to think of life,
Absolutely.
having this outlook of just I am so lucky I get to be here. These things around me are happening for me, not to me. This is happening to make me a better person. Um
Absolutely. So many times, I think when I was in brain rehab, I was in a group brain rehab, and I had never up close seen just horrific tragedy on a fairly large scale. And throughout my time in brain rehab, and I was there for almost a year and a half, the number of patients that came through the doors from all manner of human tragedy. I mean, everything from you fall off a golf cart, you get hit in the head by a horse when horseback riding, to motorcycle wrecks, to hit and run on a walk, to, I mean, every kind of just really horrific situation. I think it did something to my soul to like,
yeah.
oh, wait, every day is a profound miracle of God that I'm here.
Yeah.
And until my brain rehab experience, I hardly knew anyone, I thought, who ever had like a freak accident. And then when there, I'm seeing hundreds and hundreds of people, probably thousands actually, definitely now through Hotels Camp, thousands of lives nearly destroyed by tragedy, by, a flu, that
Yeah.
goes septic, and a woman has her legs amputated. That's 6 days ago, meeting with her. Um, the number of sweet campers at Hope House Camp who were an able bodied lacrosse playing teenager who um, got sick and found out they had a small tumor in their brain and were taken down to being the cognitive ability of a 4-year-old. Like, I mean, just stuff that is so chilling and haunting that
Yeah.
I guess it's probably propelled me to say, like, why waste this one precious life that God's given me? What
Yeah.
joy to be here and to get to show up with my people, to my story. And I just want to live my life so well.
Yeah. Well, and we know that like tomorrow is not guaranteed, you know? So you
Absolutely.
have to live out today um in his glory. And I think that's a great
Right,
point.
and I probably learned that in brain rehab too, like, we're not promised tomorrow here. Anything can happen.
Totally.
And I had no medical history, no family history, no indication anything was ever wrong with me before. I mean,
Yeah.
hindsight's 2020. So now I can see, oh, I used to faint a lot as a kid, or there were very mild neurological issues all along. I was never very coordinated. There was tiny, tiny things, but never in my wildest dreams did I know that I had this time bomb in
Right.
my brain. Had I had an MRI, they would have seen it, but I was never given an MRI.
Yeah.
Never
Yeah.
knew. And that's any of our stories, that we
Right.
have no idea what's happening in our bodies and our brains.
Yeah.
How will we live today?
Um how would you encourage someone who's in the middle of their difficulty or grief and just can't see the light at the end of the tunnel right now?
Yeah. I would say don't miss the treasure there.
Mm.
I think so often we really want out of whatever nightmare we're living through, as we should. But I like to say, if you're going through hell, keep going,
Yep.
but pick up the treasure in the hallway.
Mhm.
When God closes the door, he opens a window, but it's hell in the hallway. You may have heard that.
Yep.
Well, yeah, keep going if you're going through hell, but pick up the treasure God has for you there and learn the right lessons in the suffering.
Yeah. Um, okay, so there has been a question that I have asked all of my podcast guests this season to
Sure.
kind of wrap up our episode. And it is, what is the most meaningful act of kindness that someone has extended to you recently? And how has that made an impact on your life?
Oh, goodness. Okay, let me think. I get a lot of acts of extreme kindness. I'm reminded I severely tore my ACL, MCL, and meniscus in 2020, fairly shortly after we'd moved to Atlanta. And I was, back in a wheelchair full time, just in a really hard situation. And the Atlanta community, I mean, it was bonkers. We had meals delivered to us for months. People took our kids to school every day. I mean, it was like wild to see the acts of kindness of people who I hardly knew. We only moved to Atlanta in 2018. And I mean, we felt like we couldn't be more cared for and seen. And so, actually, Brittany, a larger point I would make about that is I've had to be the recipient of a lot of care from a lot of people through the years, a lot of acts of kindness, you'd say. And it matters.
Mhm.
A casserole isn't really just a casserole to feed somebody. A dumb casserole is, I care, I remember you, I see you. People always want to show up with all the right words to say. No one needs words. Yeah,
Right.
they will at some point. They need presence. They need people who want to show up and maybe drop food, maybe not, maybe take the kid to school, maybe not. but they need people to stand in the gap of what life is looking like when it's looking really, really bad. And they
Yeah.
want to know we're not alone. Our deepest human fear is that we are totally alone.
Yeah.
That if people know how bad it is, they'll leave. They can't handle this. It's too much. And that's such a lie. Is people can and people want to. But us people better get in there and stay when it's hard.
Yeah.
Make eye contact and love people well.
I think that's so important and a great lesson, just as somebody, like you said, who's been on the receiving end of so many acts of kindness. Like, the showing up is so important and is just a great reminder, for anybody going through or having a friend who goes through something. Just being there for them is what they need.
Totally. And you know what I would add to that, Brittany, is I have been the recipient of so much care, so many meals brought to my family, so many rides given to my kids. So much has been done for me. However, that could create tremendous guilt in me of, oh my gosh, I just people are just too kind to me, and it could leave me feeling really with a lot of guilt and shame. Like, oh my gosh, everybody has to cater to me and blah blah blah. And several years ago, the Lord revealed to me, if you were not worthy of care, you would not be here in
Mhm.
this state. Like, you would not be on this earth. This world needs you, so you are worthy of being cared for by other people. I say
Yes.
so, says God. So I'm not going to feel guilty for permanently needing my husband to drive me everywhere I go, because for some reason I am on earth and am worthy of being taken care of for my whole life. There is, in fact, breath in my lungs. And if I wasn't supposed to be here, I wouldn't be here.
Right.
I am here, so I am worthy. And that's a
Yeah.
powerful thought.
Yeah. Well, one thing you said earlier about how, you were talking about when you moved to California and y- you really were getting all of these commercial jobs because of your communication skills. And
Yeah.
I think that is such a great point and something that God is like continuing to use, like, in you, with those skills that you were like, this is what I'm doing back when I'm 26, and you're still using that gift that he gave you all these years later to tell your story, which is so unbelievable.
You are so sweet to say that. And I can't argue with you. From the time I was a young child, I have always been chatty Cathy and loved talking and was given many accolades in high school and college for communication. I was a speech communication major in college, um, but never had any idea that what was a skill for sure and still by the Lord's skill could be cultivated and matured to be something much more significant. I definitely, pre-stroke, I was teaching our Sunday school class now and then. I was a women's retreat speaker at our church, for sure. This would be a different level, most definitely. And that is just the beauty of how God uses things in the upside down kingdom. That, now that my face is paralyzed. So this is a funny story, Brittany, and I probably need to end here. But I have to tell you this. So before the stroke, I was doing a lot of commercials and commercial print modeling. And obviously, upon having the massive stroke and my face becoming paralyzed, I would assume that part of my life is entirely over. I'm never going to be doing that again. Like, that's nuts. But several years after I sort of settled back into the new normal of life, I started volunteering to speak at American Stroke Association luncheons. So there again, that speaking skill
Yep.
caught some attention. And the head of the American Stroke Association, of their marketing department, called and asked if they could hire me to be the face of their new campaign for the American Stroke Association FAST campaign. So currently, my face, which we can probably link to it in your show notes,
Yes.
literally on the sides of buses, billboards in Times Square, your local doctor's office, literally all over the country. I am quote unquote modeling in my biggest and most successful modeling job ever. And it came after my face was paralyzed and I had a massive stroke. So I cannot help but think that that is just so unbelievably like insane upside down kingdom that would be so. Now here's where it gets really nuts. So multiple people who have been tracking with me for a while, like yourself, have seen the FAST campaign somewhere, and it made a memory. They knew that was Katherine Wolf who had a stroke, and there she is, the FAST campaign. Then they, years later, have a stroke of their own and know the warning signs and to go to the hospital because the FAST campaign identifies like facial droop is the F of FAST campaign, and that's me. So the symptoms, they know they go to the hospital. At 3 different speaking engagement book signings, women have come up to me around the country in the last 15 years and said, "You saved my life because I remembered seeing an advertisement with your face on it in 2016 in Wichita, Kansas." And I'm like, what?
That is
What?
wild.
Is that not the most crazy story you've ever heard?
Yes.
As I have tried to just process the magnitude of this just crazy turn of events, like I've recognized that God can use what could be some of my very deepest wounds
Yeah.
to ultimately bring healing to the world. I mean, it's
Right.
wild. It's so hilarious. And modeling is so vacuous, honestly, largely. And this is just so not so meaningful and important. And what the heck? Oh my gosh, it's just so beautiful. And
Really is.
so if you've ever read, I just finished this book by David Brooks. What is the name? How to talk to a person, how to know a person. David Brooks, How to Know a Person. Every listener of yours should listen or read this book, How to Know a Person. Because, Brittany, that is the only skill that got me all that work
Mm-hmm.
is talk to people, make connections, look
Right.
people in the eye, dialogue, cultivate relationship. And it is like as a society, we are losing our ability to do this because we are so in our own heads, on our phones, kind of incapable of connection to others. And
Right.
that's what it's all about, I believe.
Yeah. It's so true, man. That story is so wild and just like a crazy way that God has just used everything he put you in even before the stroke to save people's lives now.
I know. It's nuts when you say it out loud.
Yeah. Wow. Well, Catherine, this has been such an honor and such a joy. I am so appreciative that you took some time today to talk with us. Where can our listeners find you on Instagram?
Oh, you are so sweet, Brittany. So all of our social media is just at Hope Heals, the name of our ministry, Hope Heals. And our website, hopeheals.com, has links to just about everything, the books and the camp and podcast. And the podcast called The Good Hard Story, and coffee shops called Mend Coffee and Guns. I think that's
Perfect.
everything.
Well, we will leave all of those details in our show notes as well with the links to everything as well. So our listeners can easily access them. But Catherine, thank you again so much. This again has just been such a joy.
It is just such a blessing. And I have to say, like, what a gift that you're in Athens, Georgia, doing this. I'm just so thankful. You know, I've done a whole lot of podcasts in the last few years. I don't think I've done any hardly with anyone from Athens, Georgia. And I love it. And I love it.
know.
filled with faith and pointing people to Jesus through your platform, Brittany. What
Yeah.
a gift you are. I'm so glad
Yes.
to know you.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
You are so welcome.